Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator, straight up conversations with me, Moshe Popack. Each week I chat with pioneers, innovators, and truly inspirational people to learn the steps they take to turn their ideas into reality. My goal is to empower you to dive in, be bold, and take profound steps toward realizing your own potential. Joining me this week is playwright Sarah Tuft. 20 years ago, she was in New York City during 9/11. The experience impacted her so much, she wrote 110 stories, a moment-by-moment journey through September 11th as told by eyewitnesses, survivors, and recovery workers. The play is still performed today around the country. She'll tell us about it and why it's a message of hope and compassion is relevant now more than ever. Next.
This is Common Denominator, straight up conversations with Moshe Popack. Now, here's Moshe.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Moshe. Great to be here, and thank you for having me.
So we're approaching 20 years since 9/11, and I know you were in New York City at the time. What was that day like for you?
20 years ago, I was a painter and a photographer. I was dabbling in video art and starting to make films. And I had stayed out the night before, later than usual, because I had a lab of directors learning to work with actors. We had a great night. We grabbed coffee afterwards. And the next morning, I woke up late and played my answering machine. In those days, it was not on your phone. And it was my mother's voice. She actually opens the play. It was clear she was trying to be light, even though she was worried I was downtown. And she didn't really know what was going on, but she talked about the towers and one tower kaplats. So I jumped on my bike and I tried to go down to help. I don't really know what I thought I would do, but it was just that instinct. And the Canal Street was cordoned off and they wouldn't let anybody in. So I started hearing about relief centers. So I biked to all the relief centers and signed up, but nobody called me. It's also impossible to give blood. There were lines around the block. So it was really a lot of us were having anguish.
So I know you ended up baking cookies, and that ultimately was what ended up getting you access to the site.
So that night I went home and I baked chocolate chip cookies. I borrowed a canister from the restaurant I lived above. I strapped a milk crate to the back of my bike. I had a big basket in the front and I went to try it again. And when the cops said, no, we're not letting anyone down, I said, but I have chocolate chip cookies, homemade. And they're like, oh, go ahead. So I went down and had my own little welcome wagon on my bike and gave out cookies and coffee. But then I sort of connected with Salvation Army, I think originally Red Cross, and started just helping out where it became more organized. It was chaos in the beginning.
It's interesting, though, that I was there. I didn't know my wife at the time. I was in college at the time at Washington Heights, so a little further up. And my wife had a friend of a friend that was in the police, and she went that night as well. And I started to drive. It was red light, green light, didn't matter. There was just this strange feeling, energetic feeling. And I'm driving through the city. Obviously, all the cops are down by the site. And to your point, I'm even getting chills right now because I'm thinking about it, the memory, almost 20 years later, that everybody was running towards that humanity. I'm thinking, I didn't know my wife's doing that. You're telling me that story. I remember that's what I'm doing. I couldn't get through the barriers, but my wife was able to get in. And that silver lining of the humanity in action of service is something that I just want to point out. So.
Well, I thought a lot about that while I was down there. So fast forward, I spent 2 to 3 months down there. And so when people started telling me their stories as I was giving out water and food, I felt like there's a lot of trauma here. At least I can listen. That was the initial impulse. I also had my camera with me at all times, but never felt comfortable using it because I felt like it would be exploitative to turn my camera to record people who were suffering.
And I know also, like, to that point, from those personal stories, right, you had this inspiration to write and produce this super amazing play, 110 stories. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was an artist who had my camera tucked away, but did not feel comfortable using it. And here I was hearing these stories. So I just gave people my email address at first and said, would you email them the story to me? And they were happy to. They also did want to share it. And it wouldn't be, they didn't have to be the person whose face was, twisted in anguish. So not enough emails came. I started asking why not. And I realized that nobody was leaving. Nobody was going home. That was a unique characteristic of this. People weren't sleeping. They just wanted to find the bodies at first, live bodies, and then the remains to help the families heal. So I got this little micro cassette recorder from Radio Shack. It's like all these things that don't exist now. Yeah. And I went around and recorded people. I recorded over 100 people, I think close to 120. And then what someone called me and said, we hear you have monologues and we're doing a benefit for Salvation Army on October 11th, 2001. And I was like, monologues? So I got a bunch of actors together because I had this lab that worked with actors, and we created this night of monologues. And from then on, I was sort of obsessed. I started weaving the stories together, taping more and more. I wanted to get every vantage point. It became like, I know a dog handler who, I worked on her dogs as the massage. So it grew and grew until I had those interviews, and then became the very long process of weeding them down to the 26 that are in the play.
So of all the stories in the play, are there any stories that really impact you the most emotionally?
They all impact me emotionally because I picked people who had giant hearts. So everyone is just an open book of all of these feelings they're having simultaneously: joy, grief, anguish, anger. But the stories that really stand out for their dramatic and emotional potential, I think there's a mother who's separated from her son, and she's spending the day like enduring tremendous, hardship and taking tremendous risks, jumping in her Birkenstock over walls to find her son. And every time she gets to the place where she thinks her son is, and she's been told her son is, she's directed to go somewhere else because someone took him somewhere else. And throughout all of 9/11, and the whole day, she's describing the different horrific things that we all saw: papers fluttering, darkness, from the ash, but she's looking for her son. It's incredibly moving and dramatic. There's also a firefighter who's sort of the central character of the first act, who is just following orders because it's so ingrained in firefighters to just follow orders, not think it. But as he's encountering this worsening and worsening situation, you can see sort of the conflict between his better judgment and what he's being told to do. And it's almost like you can watch the trauma happening. And then there's an iron worker who just wanted to help. He had the same feeling we all did. And he was in New Jersey, and he finally got over in a barge, and he started encountering, body parts and horrors and just chaos. And you could see he just wanted to get out of there, but something just kept him going. His compassion kept him going. And he talks about just seeing all these horrific things and frightening things and terrifying things. And he just goes into autopilot.
I'm sure there are many stories, by the way. Each one is, I feel each one, and tremendous. And I know also you had a lot of really popular actors, right? James Gandolfini, right? And many others that ended up playing their part in the play.
Well, it started with small one person saying yes, and then other people said yes. I think it was celebrity. I mean, they're celebrities, but they're also people they wanted to help too. And because all these productions were for charity, it was a way of giving back, giving their time and talents. And we had Billy Crudup, Edie Falco, James Gandolfini, Samuel Jackson, Cynthia Nixon, Tony Shalhoub, Kathleen Turner, Susan Sarandon, John Turturro. The list just goes on and on.
Samuel L. is one of my favorites.
Oh, he was wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, he was so wonderful. Jeremy Piven, Katie Holmes. It just, Ed Asner was in the play, and he just passed. Yeah. Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee, who also we lost some time ago, and we did lose James Gandolfini. So it's interesting as time goes on, all of these remarkable, beautiful talents who also had the compassion to want to be in the play, we're starting to see that they're becoming legends, and some of them are leaving us, which is also another layer for this play.
Really talented. Yeah, It's really special. I know now it's almost 20 years later, and still community theaters, high schools, right, university, the drama departments, still going on strong. And I think the message, because I know you go into the message of humanity, and especially now, I talk person by person, friend by friend. Everybody's just tired of the divisiveness and I think that's why the play still stands out 20 years later, that bonding and connection, human to human.
Mm-hmm. Very early after 9/11, things were getting political. Not like they are now, but at Union Square, people were arguing. It had to do with whether we were going to go to war or not. And it was not completely easy to stay apolitical, but I kept my interviews apolitical. I knew that I was interviewing a wide range of political beliefs in my subjects. So I did not encourage going in that direction, because then I'd be limiting who the play could land on and who could be inspired and deeply moved, and then leave the play having been sort of broken open, healed with the idea that the answer is to be of service. So I knew that if I brought up politics, that would prevent that.
So for you personally, I know that when you wrote the play, it sent you on a different trajectory.
Absolutely. So I really was a baby playwright. I wasn't even calling myself a playwright. It was kind of more of an art project that became a play. And I started going to theater and reading theater and taking classes at some esteemed places and learning a lot. And I never turned back. It just seemed like that was, my vocation, my calling. And now I understand why. I'm very verbal, and I'm very attuned to human behavior. And those are two things that work on stage, human behavior and language. So, I really came from the opposite end of the artistic spectrum, just being a painter and a photographer, and was slowly moving towards storytelling. But this was really my home.
It's interesting.
So,
I was just going to say, no, I resonate very much with that, because I'm 41 now, and for so much of my life, I knew from the artistic standpoint of music, and I knew that I wanted to express myself through music, and only now is that coming out. But I think that everybody should have an outlet for their creative side. So
yeah. Well, one of the things I do now is I advocate against ageism in a group called Honor Roll, Women Plus Playwrights Over 40, and our allies. But people don't always know what they want to do when they're 20, 21,
sure.
17. And that's just a different kind of person. So if we're really, as we are in theater, advocating for equity and inclusion, we need to look at these more subtle things that are personality or neurologically based, that everyone has a different trajectory, and we can't have a system that only allows people in who got the right MFA because they knew what they wanted when they were 17. So it's an interesting ride, because theater's very baked into its system.
What would you say, as an artist, inspires you the most?
Story. I mean, I'm really compelled by story. So I'm someone who loves theater, also loves some of the wonderful TV shows. And speaking of a shift in consciousness, I find it very interesting that Ted Lasso is sparking joy the way it is, because it's a real shift leaning into kindness and belief. Those are words from the show. And when I became aware of TV having shifted to something exciting, from my perspective, it was a very cynical. In fact, it was an era of bad boys like Mad Men and The Sopranos, and I love those shows. But I really am delighted in seeing a little bit of a shift, that we want some people who are doing good things to be the heroes of our show. I love Don Draper, but
Sure.
Ted Lasso is the man of the moment.
Sure. And what are I know you were even currently working with certain high school students, and what are some of the projects and the things you're working on currently?
Well, I think you mentioned that 110 Stories is having this amazing life. We're about to reach 100 productions, and that's regional, community, high school, and university theaters. And for the 20th anniversary, I wrote to the people who've been producing it for the past 10 years and made myself available to Zoom with them. And I also indicated that I could probably get some storytellers, some of the people in the play, to join us. So I had a Zoom the other day with a school, Belle Vernon. It's an hour outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the planes landed. And these kids were so they were so intelligent and full of curiosity and had this sort of adultness to them while also being kids. They had an adult attitude towards the work, but you could see they were also kids. And they had such great questions for me and for the storytellers. And it was so wonderful, especially to see the person who's being played talk to the person who's going to play them, who's a kid. Like, for instance, Jason Cascone, who's the probie, that's a beginning firefighter. His first day on the job was September 11th. So he's in the play. He's now a battalion chief with kids of his own. And when he answered the question, he said to the young people, like, I was your age, just a little older than you when I was, on a bus where we all passed a phone around to call our parents to maybe say our final goodbyes. We didn't know what was ahead. So the kids just, can you imagine their experience being able to speak with him? It was pretty amazing. Interestingly enough, more of their questions were for me. I was surprised by that.
You make it more real that way.
Yes, absolutely.
You're able to connect with the people.
Although I encourage them not to do caricatures of the people. It's about what's in the words. It's really important because they're young actors to stay with the fundamentals of the craft, which is you play what's on the page, who you're playing, whether they're this age or that age or married or single or, a truck driver or a CEO. It's about what's on the page. So I run that through to them. But I've met with a couple of theaters, Gaslight Baker Theater in Texas, Parkview, Playhouse in Wisconsin. It's been and a couple of schools. It's been incredible. And each Zoom experience is completely different.
And I'll tell you something, and I just want to reiterate that it's 20-year, and it's going to continue this way, and the impact for humanity and togetherness, connectivity. So I want to really thank you very much, Sarah. You should have tremendous success. If people want to see the show, 110 Stories, how would someone go about doing that?
Well, the easiest way is to talk to your high school, recommend it, and bring it to their attention, or your local theater, your community theater, your regional theater. It's not, as of yet, on film. There's a film script. I haven't done anything with it in a while. Around the 10th anniversary, I was talking to HBO about that. But as far as any filmed versions of the productions, because of unions and protecting actors and playwrights, there's nowhere you can see it online. But I would Google 110 stories in your neighborhood. And then the easiest way is, of course, high schools really love it. It really dovetails what they want to teach from a humanitarian point of view, from a theater point of view, because there's many lessons about acting and directing in the play, but also as a history lesson, because the kids who are in high school right now weren't alive during 9/11. So for them, 9/11 is as far away as, World War II. So sure. For them, this makes it real, and they realize this happened, really to the people, trauma is intergenerational and it's passed on. So we were all traumatized by 9/11. We've been all traumatized on and on by climate disasters, but for them to understand this event that's really recent history is important. It also, helps them understand the political landscape and the stakes we're all living with. Yeah. So it's historically, humanitarian, and on a theater craft level, an important play.
How would people, if they wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about you, how would they contact you?
I have a website, sarahtuft.com, and it has a contact sheet. That's probably the best way. If you're in the theater business, there's something called NPX, which is a sort of aggregated website. You can find me on there, but I think my website is the easiest, sarahtuft.com. And there's even, you could click on the plays and see 110 stories and see all the different, places it's played, and the stars of stage and screen who have donated their time generously and their talents for these various productions and the charities that they were funding.
It's really beautiful. And again, thank you so much, Sarah. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Moshe, and thank you for doing this important series.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to MoshePopack.com. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show.